1950, Iran. A family was found sleeping upright in salt. The Dasht-e Kavir discovery. The Dasht-e Kavir is no ordinary desert. It is vast, stretching like a pale, cracked ocean of salt across central Iran. It looks empty, but beneath the silence it hides things that no one was ever meant to find. In 1950, travelers stumbled upon something strange, something so haunting it would never be forgotten. It was a family, a whole family, preserved upright, seated as if resting in sleep, locked forever in walls of salt. The desert had swallowed them, then sealed them like statues. No one could explain how. No storm was recorded. No caravan report was filed. No missing village was ever traced to that date. And yet here they were, a portrait carved by nature, or perhaps something darker. The desert is known as the Great Salt Desert. Its cracked crust looks harmless, but step too far and you sink in a mud as thick as quicksand, only deadlier. Caravans often avoided certain routes, for horses and camels would vanish into the salt with a single misstep. Stories were whispered of whole groups never seen again. But this family was different. They weren't buried in mud. They weren't scattered bones in the sand. They were sitting still, together, as if time itself had been frozen by an invisible hand. Their clothes were simple but intact, faded by the dry wind yet untouched by decay. Salt had preserved them like ancient mummies. From a distance, it almost looked peaceful, like a moment of rest under the burning sun. But up close, details unsettled the archaeologists who first examined them. Their hands. The mother's hands were pressed tightly against her lap, fingers curled in unnatural tension. The father's head was tilted just slightly upward, as though he had seen something coming, something no one else could see. And the children, their eyes sealed shut by crystallized layers of salt, leaned gently against each other. They weren't simply asleep. Something had stopped them in unison. The discovery spread quickly. Locals whispered of curses. They called the desert a place of punishment, where the earth itself consumes those who cross it without respect. The salt, they said, does not just preserve the body, it holds the soul. But scientists, eager to dismiss superstition, tried to explain it. Was it a sandstorm that buried them in moments? Was it a sudden flood of brine, rising from underground and locking them in crystal? Or was this the work of something far older, some forgotten ritual hidden beneath centuries of desert winds? The answers never came easily, and the more people looked, the more unsettling the silence became. Night in Dasht-e Kavir is colder than ice. The stars blaze like shards of broken glass. And somewhere out there, the desert keeps its secrets. To this day, no one knows if that family was caught in an accident, or if they were placed there deliberately by hands that wanted them found. Caravans were the lifeline of Persia. For centuries, traders crossed deserts with spices, silk, and salt. The Dasht-e Kavir was one of the most dangerous routes, yet many risked it, chasing fortune. But some never returned. Among the desert's oldest stories is the tale of a vanished caravan, one said to have carried not just goods, but people, whole families, traveling together for protection. The family found in 1950 raised an old question: were they part of that caravan? Records from the late 19th and early 20th century mention missing groups who never made it between towns. Most were assumed to have perished in storms or been robbed by bandits. Yet the eerie detail is this: some descriptions mention families traveling together, not just merchants. Children, wives, grandparents. It was rare, but it happened. A caravan wasn't just business, it was survival. Better to travel in numbers than risk the desert alone. The problem is, no trace was ever found. No carts, no animals, no belongings scattered in the sand. Just disappearance. When a 1950 discovery hit the news, elders in nearby villages whispered that this family belonged to one of those lost caravans. Maybe the desert had finally returned them. But the scene was too strange to match that theory. Why were they sitting upright? Why together, in a perfect row, almost as if posed? If a storm had caught them, their bodies would have been twisted buried under dunes scattered by winds. But here they were, intact, preserved, motionless. Some archaeologists try to reason it out. They suggested a brine pool, a sudden sinkhole opening beneath their feet. Salt water could have risen fast, drowning them in seconds, then crystallizing around their bodies before decay could set in. The heat would have evaporated the water, leaving only salt and the family inside it. It sounded possible, but there was still a problem. No bones of animals were found nearby. No caravan gear. No remnants of trade goods. Just the family. The absence raised chilling questions. Were they really part of a caravan? Or had they been separated, left behind, abandoned to die? Some even whispered a betrayal, that perhaps they had been cast out by their own group, left in the desert as punishment. And if that was true, the desert did not just preserve their bodies. It preserved the moment of their banishment. The silent evidence of a choice too dark to admit. For years, locals kept retelling the story of the caravan that never returned. But after 1950, that story changed, because now it had faces. The family became the caravan's ghost. And each night, travelers in the desert claimed to see flickers of movement. Lanterns swinging in the dark, shapes walking across the salt. The caravan was still moving, they said, still searching for a road it would never find. Salt is not only a spice, it is a guardian of the dead. For centuries, people have buried food in salt to keep it from rotting. But in the desert, salt doesn't just preserve, it entombs. When a family was found in 1950, their bodies were locked inside salt walls so thick they shimmered in the sun. It was like glass, a crystallized tomb built not by human hands, but by nature itself. The effect was terrifying. From a distance, they looked almost alive. The sun bounced off the crystals, casting strange halos around their heads, like saints in a forgotten shrine. Salt has long been tied to death in Persian history. Legend spoke of salt men, mummified miners found deep inside caves, preserved for thousands of years by the very mineral they sought. But those men were buried under rock. This family, however, was in plain sight, exposed to the air. That's what disturbed researchers most. How could open bodies remain so untouched? Why hadn't wind, sun, and time destroyed them? The answer seemed impossible. The salt had worked like a coffin that never opened. When archaeologists began to chip away at the tomb, the scene grew even stranger. The salt broke in jagged sheets, sharp as glass, cutting at their hands. Each crack revealed more detail, skin still clinging to bone, fabric still draped across fragile shoulders. The desert hadn't let them go. It had claimed them. The bodies were heavy with salt crystals. Clothing felt stiff, like it had turned to stone. One child's sandal was found, still tied at the ankle, perfectly preserved, yet fused with a thick white crust, as if frozen mid-step. Every discovery deepened the mystery. This wasn't just preservation. It was display. Local villagers believed the salt was a punishment, that the family had offended something greater, perhaps the desert itself. Salt was seen as a purifier, a cleanser of sins. But here, it had become something darker, a prison for eternity. Superstition spread quickly. People refused to pass near the site. They claimed the family's eyes still moved beneath the crystals. That at night, under moonlight, the salt tomb glowed faintly, like lanterns buried underground. Scientists, meanwhile, struggled to explain it. Some proposed that underground salt springs had risen suddenly, encasing the family in a thick flood. But how could water move so fast, fast enough to trap living people upright? And why only them? Others pointed to ritual, that perhaps the family was placed there intentionally, buried alive in salt as part of an ancient practice we no longer understand. There were whispers of forgotten cults, of sacrifices meant to appease the desert's wrath. Theories clashed, but none brought peace. The salt tomb remained a silent riddle, a prison of glass-white crystals holding the family in their final moment. Even today, visitors to the region speak of the silence that lingers there, a silence too deep, too heavy, as if the desert itself remembers what happened. The salt doesn't just preserve the dead, it preserves the fear. When researchers first looked closely at the family, it struck them like a photograph frozen in time. Not scattered bones, not collapsed bodies, but a portrait. The father sat at the center, his shoulders straight, his face tilted upward, jaw slightly open as if caught mid-breath. Beside him, the mother leaned forward gently, her fingers clasped tight in her lap, nails pressing into her own skin. And the children, two of them, rested against her, eyes sealed shut with layers of white crystals. It was too perfect, too deliberate, as if someone had placed them there with care, arranging their last moment like a painting. Scientists try to study their faces, but the more they uncovered, the more disturbing the details became. The father's lips were drawn back, showing his teeth, almost like a silent scream. The mother's eyes, though sealed, carried faint traces of salt lines streaming downward, like tears frozen mid-fall. The children looked almost peaceful, until one noticed the way their small fists were clenched, pressed hard against each other. It was not rest. It was tension. The strangest part was their closeness. In death, families are rarely preserved so intact, so near. Normally, survival instincts scatter people, each person running in a different direction, collapsing where they fall. But here, the family stayed together, huddled, upright. Was it instinct? Did they cling to each other until the very last breath? Or had they been positioned that way, forced into one last embrace for reasons no one could name? Archaeologists were haunted by the arrangement. Some believed it revealed love, that even as death closed in, the family refused to separate. Others saw something darker. A ritual, a punishment staged to look like unity. The silence of the desert offered no answer. But the image itself, the portrait in salt, spoke louder than words. News of the family in salt spread across Iran. Newspapers printed the story with grainy black and white photographs that made them look even more ghostly. People traveled from distant villages just to glimpse them. Some prayed in whispers. Some refused to look at all, fearing that even a glance could draw the same fate upon them. The portrait was too human, too real. Not a relic of kings or warriors, not a ruin of empires, just a family, a mother, a father, children. It was the kind of scene that could have belonged to anyone, and that's what made it terrifying. Generations later, the image of that family still lingers in desert folklore. Stories say that travelers who pass through the salt flats sometimes hear faint sounds at night, the quiet weeping of a mother, the hollow echo of a father's voice calling out, the laughter of children swallowed by the wind. Whether truth or myth, one thing is certain. The family is remembered not as individuals, but as a portrait, a frozen mirror of fear, love, and mystery. A portrait the desert refuses to let go. Long before the family was discovered, the Dasht-e Kavir had a reputation. It was feared, avoided when possible, and only crossed by those desperate for trade. But every desert has its legends, and the caverns were darker than most. Travelers spoke of strange lights at night, lanterns moving far in the distance, swaying like a caravan that never reached its end. Some claimed they heard the sound of camels, the jingling of bells, the shuffle of footsteps. Yet when they followed, the desert was empty. These were called the whispers of the road, warnings left behind by those who never returned. When the family was unearthed in 1950, old men in nearby villages shook their heads. They had heard these whispers all their lives, and to them, the salt figures were not a discovery. They were proof. One elder told a haunting tale. He said his grandfather once joined a caravan that passed through the Kavir. At night, the men heard a woman crying, soft and low, as if carried on the wind. The next morning, one family in the caravan was gone. Their tent empty, their belongings left behind. No tracks, no footprints, nothing. The caravan moved on in silence, but whispers claimed the desert had taken them. For centuries, stories like these were dismissed as superstition. But the 1950 discovery made people wonder, were the whispers not just stories, but memories of real vanishings? Had the desert been claiming families one by one, leaving them preserved in silence until the day someone would find them? There were also rumors of betrayal. Traders often traveled in groups, but not all alliances were strong. Greed, envy, or suspicion could turn men cruel. Some believed the family had been abandoned on purpose, left behind as punishment, or sacrificed to appease something the desert demanded. And perhaps the whispers travelers heard were not ghosts at all, but guilt. The lingering echoes of choices too heavy to forget. Even today, nomads crossing the Kavir warn each other of certain paths. They tell newcomers never to follow lights in the distance, never to chase voices in the wind. Because the desert, they say, does not speak. It lures. The whispers are not guides. They are traps, and those who follow them are never seen again. The family in Salt became the strongest whisper of all. Their presence seemed to confirm every fear. They were not just victims of accident or weather. They were evidence that the desert chooses. And once it chooses, there is no escape. When word of the discovery reached Tehran, archaeologists rushed to the desert. They expected bones, perhaps a burial site, maybe even ancient relics from forgotten dynasties. What they found instead left them speechless. The family was not ancient. Their clothes were too recent. Their sandals too modern. They belonged not to history, but to the present, people who might have lived in any nearby village. That made the silence worse. The first team began careful excavation. They broke the salt slowly, chiseling layer by layer, documenting everything. But the deeper they worked, the stranger it became. The salt wasn't random. It wrapped each body like a shell, forming an outline around them, almost as if the mineral had grown intentionally, shaping itself to their forms. The bodies were upright, perfectly balanced, and weighted down by thick crusts of crystal. It was unlike anything the archaeologists had ever seen. Tests revealed another unsettling fact. The family's bodies were astonishingly intact. Flesh had hardened, skin still clung to bone. Fabrics still bore patterns despite decades of exposure. It was as though they had died yesterday, not years ago. Salt had done what no coffin, no tomb, no grave could have achieved. It had stolen time. But one question remained. How did they die? The scientists searched for answers. No stab wounds, no crushed bones, no sign of attack from bandits or raiders. They looked for evidence of drowning, suffocation, starvation. Nothing. The only clue was their posture. Frozen mid-sitting, mid-leaning, mid-breath. It looked like sudden death, instantaneous, as if a single moment had claimed them all at once. Theories collided. Some insisted they had fallen into a brine pool, instantly trapped and crystallized. Others claimed gas from beneath the earth had poisoned them, dropping them where they sat. But there was no evidence, no residue, no geological anomaly, nothing solid to explain it. For every theory, another hole appeared. Science could describe how salt preserved the bodies, but science could not explain the silence of their deaths. One archaeologist wrote in his notes, "It feels as though they were placed here by unseen hands. Not buried, not lost, positioned. A family portrait sealed in salt." The words were never published in official reports, but in private circles, researchers whispered about them, because many felt the same unease. They had studied ruins, tombs, and relics of kings, but never had they seen death so close, so human, so unexplained. The more they tried to explain, the more the mystery grew, until finally, the desert gave them nothing more. The site was sealed. The family left where they had been found. Archaeologists departed in silence, carrying not answers but questions. Questions that still echo today, like wind across the salt. Long before the 1950 discovery, Persia had already known of salt's eerie power. In mines scattered across the land, workers sometimes unearthed bodies, men who had died thousands of years earlier, yet still looked almost alive. They were called the salt men. Hair still clung to their skulls. Boots were still strapped to their feet. Even the contents of their stomachs could be studied, as if they had just eaten their last meal. Salt, it seemed, was not only a preserver, it was a captor. When villagers learned about the family in the Dasht-e Kavir, they quickly tied them to this legend. If miners could be trapped forever in salt, why not travelers? But there was one chilling difference. The salt men had died underground, hidden in mines and caves. The family had been displayed out in the open, sitting in perfect silence under the sun, almost as though the desert wanted them seen. That thought gave rise to whispers of a curse. The curse said that salt does not simply preserve, it judges. Those who take too much from the earth, or who cross the desert without respect, are marked. When the time comes, the desert does not kill them in chaos. It freezes them, displays them, and makes them a warning for the living. Some even claimed that the family in salt was not the first, that there were others still buried out there, waiting to be uncovered, each one a message left for mankind. Among villagers, the site quickly became taboo. No one wanted to go near it. Shepherds refused to graze their flocks on that side of the desert. Travelers made long detours, even at the cost of days. The fear was simple. If you saw the family too closely, if you looked into their preserved faces, the desert might claim you next. Archaeologists, of course, dismissed the curse. They saw it as folklore, superstition, but even they admitted something strange. Several members of the excavation team reported sudden illness after working at the site. Headaches, dizziness, even fainting spells in the heat. One man left the project entirely, refusing to return. He swore that, while brushing salt from the father's face, he had felt the body breathe. The others laughed, but unease lingered. The salt men of Persia had always been reminders of the desert's hidden power. But the family of 1950 made that power personal. It was no longer ancient history, no longer nameless miners from forgotten dynasties. It was a mother, a father, children, ordinary people just like anyone else. And that made the curse harder to ignore. Even now, some locals say that the desert still chooses its victims. That when caravans vanish without trace, it is not chance, nor weather, nor bandits. It is salt, reaching upward, pulling the living into its grip. The family was not unlucky, they say. They were chosen. Some historians began to trace the family's origins. Villages near the Dasht-e Kavir were small, isolated, built of sun-baked clay and stone. But one village long abandoned stood out. Maps from the 1940s hinted at its location. By 1950, it was gone. No homes, no roads. Not even ruins remained, just a faint depression in the desert floor, as if the earth had swallowed it whole. Could the family have come from this vanished village? Villagers who had fled told stories of sudden disappearances. People would leave their homes to tend fields or fetch water and never return. Others vanished while traveling short distances for market. Sometimes the only thing left behind was an abandoned cart or a stray sandal. The pattern was chilling. One day, bustling life. The next, silence. A village emptied without explanation. Researchers began to wonder if the Salt family was the first or last link in this chain. Perhaps the desert did not simply preserve one family. Perhaps it had claimed an entire village, one household at a time, until nothing remained. Archaeologists and locals debated the theory. Some argued the villagers had migrated, fleeing poverty or disease. Others whispered that the desert had decided. And once it decides, nothing, not even a village, can resist. The desert's power was subtle, yet absolute. Sandstorms could appear without warning, swallowing roads and tracks. Salt flats could crack open, swallowing animals or travelers. An underground brine could rise and vanish, leaving no trace of its victims. In this deadly theater, the vanished village became a ghost story written in sand and salt. And the family in salt? Their frozen forms were the proof that the desert's judgment was real. Locals began marking areas as cursed, avoiding any paths near the vanished village. Some carried talismans, recited prayers, or left offerings of food and water in hopes of appeasing whatever force ruled the salt flats. But still, every year, whispers of disappearances returned. It seemed the desert could not be satisfied. It always wanted more. The family in Salt became a grim symbol, a warning of what could happen if one ignored the desert's unspoken rules. No village could withstand it. No household was safe. And in the end, the vanished village was never mapped again. Its memory existed only in stories and in the crystallized figures of a single family, forever upright, forever watching, forever warning. Some scholars began to look beyond natural explanations. They asked a chilling question. Had the family been part of a ritual? Across ancient Persia, salt has long held symbolic power, purity, preservation, even punishment. Could the desert itself have been the altar? Could the family have been offered to it, alive, as a sacrifice? The arrangement of the bodies made this theory tempting. They were upright, posed, hands folded, children nestled against their parents. It was unnatural, deliberate. If the desert had simply killed them by accident, they would not have been so perfectly preserved together. The idea horrified the locals, but some believed it was true. Sacrifice, they said, was not always cruel in intent. It could be protection, a way to appease a desert that demanded respect and obedience. Legend spoke of entire families being offered to gods, spirits, or natural forces. The ritual required not violence, but stillness, sitting in silence until the earth claimed them. Salt, in this context, was not punishment. It was the medium of preservation, the seal of the offering. Historians struggled to find records of such rituals in the Dasht-e Kavir region. There were hints, vague mentions in ancient texts of offerings to the desert, but nothing specific, nothing that mentioned living families. It was as if the knowledge had been deliberately erased. Yet some evidence lingered. Small carvings were found in nearby rock faces, triangles, circles, and lines resembling human forms. They seemed to tell a story of unity, preservation, and passage. Perhaps they were warnings or instructions. The family, preserved in salt, could have been the final chapter. The desert's message made clear: obey or be consumed. Some archaeologists rejected the theory outright. They could not reconcile science with ritual. But even the most skeptical admitted a strange aura at the site, a presence that seemed to watch, to weigh, to judge. Stories grew among villagers. They said if you approached the family at night, you could hear whispers in the wind, chants, prayers, even cries. Not just echoes of the past, but echoes of something living within the salt. The family became more than discovery. They became legend, a ritual frozen in time, a warning etched not in words, but in crystallized flesh and stone-white salt. And the desert continued to hold its secrets, waiting for the next family, the next sacrifice, the next whisper in the wind. Even decades after 1950, the Dasht-e Kavir remains one of the most feared places in Iran. Travelers speak of silence, so thick it presses on the chest. The wind carries strange noises, soft footsteps, the brush of cloth, whispers that vanish when you strain to hear them. The desert waits. Always. The family in salt became the desert's most famous secret. But they are not alone. Other vanishings continue to be reported. Caravans disappearing, small groups of travelers never reaching their destination. The patterns are the same. The desert chooses, and those chosen never return. Even scientists and explorers tread carefully. Equipment fails. Compasses spin. Radios go silent. Some swear they see figures in the distance, shapes sitting upright in the salt, like mirrors of the family discovered in 1950. Locals still tell the story to outsiders with a warning. Respect the desert, they say. Do not take what is not offered. Do not travel its salt flats lightly. The desert is patient. It does not rush. It waits for the unwary. The family's bodies remain where they were found, locked in their crystal prison. Over the decades, some salt has flaked away. Some details have been eroded by wind. Yet their figures remain upright, a ghostly tableau of stillness, love, and fear. To those who see them, the family is more than a mystery. They are a mirror, a reflection of what could happen if one ignores the desert's quiet judgment. And so, the Dasht-e Kavir waits. A vast, silent expanse of white, hiding its secrets under the sun and stars. A desert that preserves, a desert that punishes, a desert that watches. No one knows what will be found next. No one knows which traveler will be the next to join the whispers. But the desert, patient as ever, waits. Somewhere out there, salt crystallizes around the living, freezing a moment in time. And the story begins again. The Dasht-e Kavir has not finished. It never will.